city of Manhattan Beach in 1912. An entrepreneur, a black woman, that said, I have the money, I want the land, and it thrived. People from all over Los Angeles County came here to this beach because they couldn't go anywhere else to enjoy the Pacific Ocean freely. We must never, ever forget that. We must never, ever forget that. We must never, ever forget that. So I am so grateful that all of you are here today. And just make sure.
Good morning, everyone. As the South Bay Assembly member representing Manhattan Beach, I am proud to join this group of leaders on this podium here today. You know, it's hard to believe that this beautiful beach was just one of two so-called black beaches in Los Angeles County 100 years ago. And what makes this all the more important was that, as Supervisor Hahn stated earlier, this was their piece of the California dream. They owned this beautiful land. They owned this beautiful view. And today, we are here to, I know a lot has changed over the last 100 years. We still need to work for a lot more change. But let me just say, first of all, as a representative of Manhattan Beach, as a South Bay resident for 25 years, that I know that Manhattan Beach is not a racist city. That I know that Manhattan Beach is not a racist city. I know that there are good people.
My whole life growing up in Los Angeles County, that somehow we didn't experience that racial discrimination and hate and KKK incidents like the South did.
My name is Steve Bradford, and I'm the senator from the 35th Senate District, just a little east of here. In Constable history, Charles and Willa Bruce were a young black couple who created the West Coast's first beach resort owned by and meant for black Americans. Under their leadership, Bruce's Beach became a lively and flourishing resort. Soon, a half dozen other black families purchased land and established their own property right here in this area.
You know what I think is so telling about this story? The truth of the matter is, how many of us never imagined that black people were property owners 100 years ago, or that a young black couple had the vision and desire to own beachfront property 100 years ago. Well, please know that that story doesn't start or end with the Bruces. There were other black families who bought neighboring parcels throughout this area.
San Diego. And I remember plenty of stories that my grandmother told me, Granny. And one of the stories that Granny told me was in San Diego, when they wanted to enjoy a beach experience, that they had to drive to this beach in Manhattan Beach. There were no beaches in San Diego County or Orange County that welcomed African Americans then. My grandmother told me that it was an all-day ordeal, that they had to get up early in the morning. If you can imagine, back then, it was this Highway 101. A 2-lane highway from San Diego to Manhattan Beach that took 5 or 6 hours to get to, just to enjoy a peaceful day safely here as a beachgoer. And then to take that same trek back home, and she would get home late at night. As I remember sitting on her couch many years ago, and she told me this story, there was emotions that...
But overall, we're here to honor Willa and Charles Bruce. I can just kind of feel Willa right here, right now. She said, this is my land, and I'm gonna keep it. I've been here for over 30 years, more than half of my adult life. And 17 of those years, I've given back to this community as a mayor, council member, commissioner,
And it was about standing up for the people that were considered the least amongst us.
100 years ago, they owned this beautiful beachfront property here in Manhattan Beach, and Bruce family. And I think that's what makes this celebration more hopeful.
We're excited, and we're celebrating, and we're happy.
I wanted to live on the beach, and now here I find out my family own the beach.
We really appreciate Dennis Hines' office, the mayors, and all the people from Color for Change.
And I actually grew up in Los Angeles in the 50s and the 60s, and somehow grew up thinking that we here in Los Angeles didn't experience the kind of racial discrimination that, you know, Alabama and the South were going through. We didn't see drinking fountains that were labeled white and colored. I grew up in schools that were integrated. So in the early 1900s, there was an African-American couple named Charles and Willa Bruce, and they purchased beautiful beachfront property in Manhattan Beach and turned it into a resort for African Americans in the Los Angeles and surrounding areas. And remember, this was a time that African Americans weren't particularly welcomed at the beaches. In fact, a black beach resort where African Americans from all over came and enjoyed themselves and, you know, had this beautiful, again, beachfront property that they enjoyed.
This is the land that my people owned back in the 1920s, and it was called Bruce's Resort. As you can see, it's only a small piece of land, but it was the whole world to the African American community at that time. This was the only place on the entire coast of California where African Americans could come and enjoy the water. So the property started right there at the brick wall there and extended down here to the beach. And then from here, all the way over to the other side of that building that has the observation deck. The restaurant was on the bottom, the dance hall was on the top there, and then the bathhouse was next door.
The black residents felt so comfortable with race relations that they would send their children to our local schools. And our schools would put them front and center to show that, hey, we are not a racist community. Look how happy this girl looks. She looks the happiest out of all of them. Bruce's Beach left behind a lot of memories. For nearly 15 years, beginning in 1912, the resort represented an almost magical destination for black residents of Southern California, an oceanfront haven where one could experience, if briefly, a different sort of world, a place of peace and celebration for African Americans. Many thousands came. The Bruces hosted family gatherings, railroad worker celebrations, coming of age and going away parties. People often arrived dressed to the nines. Bruce's Lodge was a place to be seen, in part, but more generally, the African American community of the 1910s and 20s was rich with style. Whether on the beach or in the dance hall, elegance was a value among the patrons of Bruce's Beach. The California Eagle, the race paper, which closely covered the comings and goings at Bruce's Beach, reported on a moonlight truck ride, one of the most delightful events of the season that took place one Saturday night. It was a going away party for Miss Etta Trout, who was leaving for New York, and featured a ride to the beach for a party of 36 young people. Moonlight night was grand for the trip. When the party arrived, Mrs. Bruce had the dance hall nicely arranged and the tables beautifully decorated. A delicious dinner was served. The evening was spent in dancing and whist. Music was furnished by Miss Harris and Orchestra. The dance hall on the second floor of Bruce's Lodge frequently featured orchestras. The jazz age was just dawning in America, and some of its early luminaries graced the stage on the Manhattan Beach oceanfront. One frequent performer was Professor Thomas LeBlanc, who'd been part of the very birth of jazz in this native New Orleans. LeBlanc played some of his hometown early influential brass bands and taught King Oliver trumpet. King Oliver then taught a young Louis Armstrong the instrument.
And now, folks, here's a little number that I wrote myself.
Several historical figures who would become among the most prominent civil rights defenders of the 20th century were also visitors to Bruce's Beach, including H. Claude Hudson, a co-founder of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, and among the most revered black leaders in Los Angeles history, E. Burton Cerruti, the co-founder of the NAACP LA's chapter, who in 1908 scored an important legal victory forcing the desegregation of LA County's nursing training program. Hugh Macbeth, a Harvard Law graduate who led desegregation efforts in LA, and perhaps the most famous, successfully defended Japanese American interned during World War II in a landmark Supreme Court case, and Willis O. Tyler, another Harvard Law graduate who'd established a law firm with Macbeth in 1912 and was particularly famed for his oratory skills. These were the type of people that were hanging out at Bruce's Beach. It was a mecca for the who's who in the black community. So the editor of a black newspaper, The Eagle, writes this: grand opening, June 16th. The beautiful seashore resort, Bruce Beach, is where for the past few seasons, those of us who want real pleasure and recuperation away from the heat and dust of the city during the hot summer season take pleasure in going. Each season, the management of this resort adds to the beauty and comfort, and this place, the bathing facilities installed last summer, added more comfort and completeness, and now that the season is ready, Bruce Beach throws wide open its doors, bidding you welcome to spend the day, week, or month. Take Redondo Car on Hill Street, get off at Peck's Pavilion. What a great endorsement. April 13th, more than 30 young people accepted the invitation of Miss Frances Henderson on last Saturday evening for a dancing party and weenie bake at Bruce Beach. The young people met at Prince Dice's drugstore, where several automobiles transferred them to the beach. After dancing, they gathered around bonfires built on the sand and roasted their weenies. The young people declared this is to be one of the most unique affairs of the season. The party was given in honor of Miss Arthur Booker of Des Moines. Awesome beach bonfires. Gibbons. The 25 guests enjoyed a wiener bake and watermelon feast on the sand. The truck returned to LA in the wee hours of the morning. Suffice to say, everyone had a great time. Camping out. 20 boys from East 9th Street, colored branch of the Los Angeles YMCA, are enjoying a 3-day camp at Bruce Beach under the direction of Harry Silk Boys, work secretary of the Central YMCA. That's awesome. Kids, 3 days at Bruce Beach. Sounds amazing. At 2 p.m., Professor LeBlanc and his band will give a grand band concert on the beach. Here's an actual photograph from that day. Everyone looks beautiful and well-dressed, and it looks like an awesome, awesome affair. Polo Club Triumph. The above cut is a picture of the multitude which attended the outing at Bruce Beach on October 11th. About 800 went down on the red cars, while fully 350 more came down in automobiles. What a great event, though. Here's a photograph from that event. Miriam Matthews, Los Angeles' first black librarian, writes, "You would take the red car down, spend a day on the beautiful beach, or rent a room if you desired. Sundays were reserved for school gatherings and families, and the resort offered a getaway overlooking the Pacific Ocean. If one tired of the sand and surf, the parlor was available for listening to music and dancing."
33 by 100 square foot plots were once owned by Willa and Charles Bruce, entrepreneurs who arrived here from New Mexico in the early 1900s, among a wave of black Americans who'd migrated to California from across the country, while Willa owned and managed their resort, known as Bruce's Beach, which was among the first oceanfront properties here that was owned by and servicing black residents.
It was a pop-up tent affair when they first opened.
Dr. Allison Rose Jefferson is a historian of towns like this one.
This was an opportunity for a leisure business to provide services to African Americans who wanted to come to the beach. They would be less harassed.
Let's give her a round of applause. There comes a time, as stated in 1912, Charles and Willa Bruce were a young black couple who created the West Coast's first beach resort owned by and meant for black Americans. Under their leadership, Bruce's Beach became a lively and flourishing resort. Soon, a half dozen other black families purchased land and established their own property right here in this area. As Manhattan, my family was the first black family on my street. I rode my bike with my white friends to this beach as a kid. I'm sorry, in 1912, an African-American couple by the name of Charles and Willa Bruce bought a piece of land in Manhattan Beach. They bought it with the intentions of living out their American dream of owning a business, but also adhering to those rules that existed at that time, separate but equal. They started a resort, a bathhouse, a dance hall, a restaurant to cater to the African American population. And from the day that business was established, it was successful.
Around 700 people attended the candlelight vigil here earlier tonight at Matlock's Park.
When we saw that we had a community that was behind us and they wanted to be there with us to go through this, it started the healing process for us.
Beach is what we call one of the South Bay beach cities, just south of LAX. It's a small community where people really do know each other.
We've always been considered, just one of the neighbors.
We moved into the new home about a year ago.
It appeared from all indications the fire was intentionally set. The motive in this is still under investigation. Racial motivation and hate crimes are being considered.
If it is determined that this is a hate crime or racially motivated, we will do everything we can to ensure that the person responsible for this is brought to the highest level of prosecution.
It's important that people not feel disenfranchised. When you have the police chief or the fire chief say, "We hear you," it means that we're not alone.
Manhattan Beach stands together.
Manhattan Beach fights back. An overwhelming show of support tonight for an African-American family that was hit by a firebombing. Eyewitness News reporter Jory Rand is live in Manhattan Beach with tonight's emotional rally. Jory.
Mark, when this attack first happened a few nights ago, this family wondered if they'd have to leave Manhattan Beach. But after seeing so much of the town show up tonight to support them, they now say they're not going anywhere.
I just want to say thank you. Thank you for coming out.
Hundreds gathered in Manhattan Beach tonight lighting candles, showing support for the Clinton family, whose home early Wednesday morning was firebombed.
It was just amazing to see the turnout.
We are speechless, so appreciative of the love that you all are showing. Oh, I feel like a
Tonight, it was the residents who were fighting back.
Manhattan Beach stands together.
It's not what our city, our community is all about, and we're going to get the person who did this.
Reach out to the Clintons to let them know that no matter what, we're supporting them.
I'd like to send this email out encouraging people to attend the vigil on Friday. And that was it. And then we arrived, and it seemed like it was just us when we arrived.
She made a point to say, don't be late to your own function. So she got us there early. We were there good and early.
And the next thing you know, the plaza was full of, I don't even know how it happened.
Let our love, like these lights, shine brightly upon you.
We couldn't believe the magnitude of the people that were there and people we had never met. It just spread like wildfire.
We all need to feel safe in our home, no matter what color our skin is, what religion we are, what our sexual orientation is. And if you attack any of us, you attack all of us. And that's when you get power. And I think it's the best of what a small town can be.
We are going to find whoever did this.
I believe it.
There was a hug line, you know. Everybody wanted a hug.
It was just a perfect example of how love can heal.
I have no fear because we have you.
Manhattan Beach stands together.
For our daughter in the middle school, her English teacher had all of her classes participate in a letter writing campaign to the local newspaper, the Beach Reporter. And so they got hundreds of letters just to say, you know, what it meant to them and what emotions they had. And the same for our young son. You know, we've got 3 kids at 3 different schools. So they all felt the love, every one of them.
It's one of the most renowned beach communities on the West Coast, as Manhattan Beach offers 2 miles of sandy shores and multi-million-dollar homes. Bruce's Beach.
In 1912, Charles and Willa Bruce were a young black couple who created the West Coast's first beach resort owned by and meant for Black Americans.
In a time when Jim Crow segregation laws prevented African Americans from enjoying other parts of the sand, the Bruce family welcomed all and flourished as business owners.
Called Bruce's Beach provided a safe getaway for Black families at the time.
Of land where Bruce's Lodge, the resort, the safe harbor for Black families all over Southern California to come for a day at the beach.
Bruce family was once owned by Willa and Charles Bruce. They used the property to build a resort to serve Black residents.
Bruce's Lodge in 1912, when the couple created the first resort on the West Coast, owned by and meant for Black Americans. But in that
beach was on the coast of Manhattan Beach as the first and only Black-owned beach resort in Southern California.
Well, it's a beautiful stretch of California beach.
Manhattan Beach is famous for its sun-kissed sand and magnificent scenery.
A look, this is coveted land which was bought by Willa and Charles Bruce back in 1912 for about $1,225. Because in the midst of the Jim Crow era segregation, the Bruce family obviously owned this piece of property which is just north of the Manhattan Beach Pier, and it was a safe haven, as you mentioned, for many black families to enjoy the beach, where oftentimes at other beaches they were not welcomed, and so they opened up a lodge and a resort here to serve black Americans.
In the 1920s, the property was one of the few places black families could go along the California coast because of segregation. A county lifeguard center now sits on the property.
But Willa and Charles Bruce acquired this property in 1912, and they created the first West Coast resort for African Americans, adhering to those separate but equal laws. And they built a African American beach resort, bathhouse, dance hall, restaurant, you name it, lodging for African Americans. And shortly after they built this out, other African American families also moved to Manhattan Beach and started acquiring property around the resort. Shortly thereafter,
The Strand in what is today called Manhattan Beach. She ran a really popular lodge. There was a cafe and a dance hall, and it provided black families a way to enjoy a weekend at the coast. The area became known as Bruce's Beach, and more black families moved in, buying cottages all along the
Bruce's Beach today is technically the name of a grassy park overlooking the ocean in Manhattan Beach. Some folks told me that growing up, they just knew this stretch of beach as 26th Street or the Lifeguard Tower. But more than a century ago, in the early 1900s, a prominent black couple, Willa and Charles Bruce, had come west, pioneers, bought 2 parcels of land, built a resort, a cafe, a popular dance hall, and transformed this whole area into a popular gathering place for black Californians